And let's begin by getting you details of the latest horrifying anti-Semitic attack at a Jewish community event in Colorado's Boulder. A man used a flamethrower, used Molotov cocktails, petrol bombs to set people on fire. This gathering was held in support of Israeli hostages held in Gaza. And now what you see on your screens, those images is of the accused, a citizen from Egypt, a native of Egypt, who is in America for the last many years, seen there shirtless, yelling, even as he has those bottles in his hand, which he was throwing at some of these pro-Israeli groups, yelling, "Palestine is free." Details in our report on exactly what transpired in Colorado.
The second anti-Semitic attack in the US in less than 2 weeks. This time at a Jewish community event in Boulder, Colorado. The gathering was held to show solidarity with Israeli hostages who still remain in Gaza. The event took a horrific turn as a man used a flamethrower and Molotov cocktails to set people on fire.
He's right there, he's throwing Molotov cocktails right there.
Yelling "Free Palestine," he injured at least 8 people, aged 52 to 88, before being detained.
We know that 4 of those victims were taken to Boulder Community Hospital and remain there or have been released. I don't know the status of that. 2 additional victims were airlifted to the Denver metro area.
The lone suspect detained was identified as 45-year-old Mohammad Sabri Soliman. He's facing multiple felony charges. FBI Director Kash Patel called the incident a targeted terror attack. Colorado Attorney General described it as a hate crime given the group that was targeted.
The FBI is processing the crime scene and the subject vehicle and interviewing key witnesses. We're assisting Boulder Police in providing technical, analytic, and additional forensic resources. As a result of these preliminary facts, it is clear that this is a targeted act of violence, and the FBI is investigating this as an act of terrorism.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement that the victims were attacked simply because they were Jews, adding that anti-Semitic attacks around the world must be stopped. Jewish leaders called for action against attacks on their community in the wake of rising anti-Semitic violence and threats. Less than 2 weeks ago, 2 Israeli embassy staff members were shot dead in Washington, D.C. by an attacker who also yelled "Free Palestine" while being arrested.
Free, free Palestine! Free, free Palestine!
The increase in anti-Semitic hate crime comes amid heightened tensions in the United States over Israel's war on Gaza. The Trump administration has detained pro-Palestinian protesters and cut off funding to U.S. universities that have permitted such demonstrations. With Pranay Upadhyay, Bureau Report, India Today.
So that incident that took place in Colorado has been deemed as a terror attack by the FBI. I'd like to bring in on this broadcast Irfan Nuruddin, Professor of Indian Politics at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. He's joining us from Washington, D.C. Good evening, or rather good morning, Professor Nuruddin. This particular incident that's taken place in Boulder, extremely worrying. So to you, Professor, what do you think has been the primary driver of the surge of anti-Semitism, a wave of sorts in America?
Maybe, firstly, one has to start by condemning all violence against all people, in particular, those targeted at people on the basis of their religion and identity. So anti-Semitic violence such as this should be condemned in the most uncertain terms. I'm glad you're covering this story. It deserves attention. The surge, and you also referenced in your opening the horrific murder of 2 innocent employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. That attack actually occurred just outside Georgetown University's downtown campus, so it was very close to home. The whole university was put on alert because it wasn't clear what was exactly happening, and the concern was that some of our students might have been endangered. As to the question of why this is occurring right now, firstly, anti-Semitic violence of this nature has unfortunately always been part of American life, but the frustration on the parts of some on the, let's call it the left, but we have to remember that the voices and the actions of these two individuals who have committed these acts of violence are not representative of the left as a whole, right? They're extremists and deserve to be labeled as such. But that general frustration that after 2 years, a year and a half post October 7, 2023, the attacks on Gaza by the Israeli government have just continued in spite of tremendous world reporting about the attacks on innocent Gazans. And I think the notion that no matter what the peaceful protests have done to try and hold the American government accountable for its unconditional support of Israel, there has been no traction. They didn't get any traction under President Biden. They're not getting any traction under President Trump. This does not at all excuse the use of violence, but I think we have to understand all of what's happened over the last year and a half has been connected to a long-standing frustration with American foreign policy in the Middle East. Unfortunately, some actors choose to go beyond the law and commit these horrible crimes that both, are violence against humanity, but also delegitimize the peaceful protests of other people fighting for Palestinian rights and to bring attention to what is happening in Gaza.
Just focusing on America right now, Professor Nuruddin, do you think that the Trump government has taken certain steps, meaningful steps at that, to kind of combat this anti-Semitism? Largely, you see it, of course, in combating what's happening in universities. But overall, do you think the government has actively addressed this problem?
I do not believe so. I think what the government has done, unfortunately, is weaponize the language of anti-Semitism to make problematic any criticism of the American foreign policy vis-a-vis Israel and any criticism of Israeli policy in Gaza. There is no question that anti-Semitism needs to be addressed and attacked, as is any anti-religious violence of any kind, Islamophobia, Hinduphobia, anti-Christian violence in different parts of the world. All of it deserves to be condemned and attacked. But what the Trump administration has done is use that language to go after peaceful protesters, those exercising their First Amendment rights in the US on free speech, and make any criticism commensurate with anti-Semitism. This is extremely dangerous. And I should be clear that opposition to Israeli policy in the Middle East is not just limited to those who are not Jewish. In fact, in your opening clip, the individuals coming out of and being arrested wearing the "Not in My Name" T-shirts are part of a Jewish community, activists who are also protesting the actions of Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. So people of all sides and all religions are allowed to express this. Look, the Trump administration has long had associations with virulent anti-Semites who are in fact now in very powerful parts of the government and influencing this. So I would just urge your listeners to be very skeptical of the Trump administration's claims that it is suddenly the defender of Jewish people and Jewish Americans in particular, and while keeping still it quite clear that any attack on Jewish people or any attack on people because of their links to pro-Israeli positions are simply unacceptable in a civilized democratic society.
Many would side with the argument that the Trump government's crackdown has been rather exaggerated, therefore cracking down on free speech as well in campuses. But Professor Nuruddin, you look at what's really caused this kind of wave of anti-Jew hate. Do you think that there are many groups out there who, while speaking for Gaza, also cannot tell the difference between Israeli policy and what Jews stand for? And that's where it turns into, blurred lines of violence as well?
That's a really great point. I absolutely agree with you. Unfortunately, the true victims of all of this are ordinary Israelis and Palestinians who would like nothing more than to live in peace, and who are betrayed every day by their leaders and by global leaders who use them as pawns in their own political positions. So Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to speak on behalf of all Israeli people, even though his own population is divided as to what's going on. Hamas is hardly the legitimate representative of all Palestinian people, and yet it presumes to speak on their behalf. And then you have, as you point out, groups around the world in the United States, in Europe, that purport to speak on behalf of the Palestinian people, I apologize, of the Palestinian people, but actually care very little about the Palestinian people. They're using them as a way of prosecuting their own agenda. And a lot of that is, in fact, anti-Semitic agenda. It is about a criticism of the existence of Israel as a nation, the right of Jewish people to practice their faith freely. And so we have to really keep in our hearts everyday, ordinary, innocent civilians on both sides of that border. We should pray for peace, and we should not have any sympathy with people who use politics and use these people as a tool and as a pawn in their political agenda.
And my final question to you, Professor, is, we're just going to hand over to a report on Megha Vemuri, on what happened at MIT. With the current crackdown on universities, and particularly those which host these kind of protests for Gaza, is there a sense of fear in universities, in varsities? Is there an attempt to clamp down on student voices so that the Trump administration doesn't take note and crack down themselves?
100%. You have, unfortunately, a perverse cycle in which the Trump administration's weaponization of anti-Semitism as a way of attacking universities and free speech at universities is seen, therefore, as universities as the real threat. And if they can keep that under the hood, it avoids the worst offenses. Remember, what happened at Harvard was Trump using the pretext of anti-Semitism to demand that the Harvard administration hand over personal details of all international students at Harvard. Right? Harvard bravely chose not to do that. But if you think about it, what does fighting anti-Semitism have to do with handing over the details of every international student regardless? So it is that conflation that universities are recognizing, that the Trump administration uses one pretext to go after the other. In the case of Ms. Vemuri, congratulations to her graduating class president at MIT. What she chose to do was use her minutes to talk about Palestine. It is important to remember, though, that all student speakers at pretty much any university commencement event anywhere in America have their remarks pre-vetted. So what she chose to do was give one set of remarks to her administration saying, this is what I'm going to say, and then substituting that with something, because she knew that it wouldn't be approved, right? She knew it wouldn't be approved, but she did violate, in that sense, the rule followed. Punishment under that sense is okay, but the fact that she clearly knew that if she said, this is what I want to say, that she felt like she would not be approved, that is really chilling. That is very sad. And it is the way in which academic freedom and the freedom of speech more generally gets eroded because you're worried about government, prosecution, government challenging of your independent views.
So as a result of her speech there at the commencement ceremony, Megha Vemuri has been barred from the graduation ceremony and from attending classes further. But thank you very much, Professor Irfan Nuruddin, for your time, for joining us here on India Today and kind of explaining to us what's really been happening in America as far as this wave of Jew hate is concerned, but focusing particularly on our universities and the story of Megha Vemuri. I'm sure you've seen her video going viral on social media. This was her speaking at the commencement ceremony of MIT. And this Indian-American student went ahead and put out a message which she hadn't told, by the way, the organizers or the university. She chose to speak there at that particular ceremony about what's happening in Gaza, calling out Israel, calling out the university, saying they have links to the Israeli military.
From the river to the sea! From the river to the sea! Palestine will be free! Palestine will be free!
As the Donald Trump administration cracks down on pro-Palestine demonstrations in universities across America, the spotlight is now on an Indian-American student at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology.
You showed the world that MIT wants a free Palestine.
Megha Vemuri, the president of the MIT class of 2025, is the latest in the list of students to face disciplinary action after protesting against Israel's war on Gaza. Megha was barred from attending her graduation ceremony over her speech at the commencement ceremony, for which she had worn a keffiyeh. In her speech, Megha called out the MIT for having research ties with the Israeli army.
The Israeli occupation forces are the only foreign military that MIT has research ties with. This means that Israel's assault on the Palestinian people is not only aided and abetted by our country, but our school. As scientists, engineers, academics, and leaders, We have a commitment to support life, support aid efforts, and call for an arms embargo, and keep demanding now, as alumni, that MIT cuts the ties.
Praising campus activism in support of Palestinian rights, Megha asserted that the students of MIT will not tolerate genocide.
Right now, while we prepare to graduate and move forward with our lives, there are no universities left in Gaza. We are watching Israel try to wipe Palestine off the face of the earth, and it is a shame that MIT is a part of it. The MIT community that I know would never tolerate a genocide. I know you will take it head on.
Megha was expected to speak again at the main graduation event, but was informed she would no longer be allowed to participate. She was barred from campus till the conclusion of the event. MIT officials have said that her remarks differed from the speech approved in advance and that her actions amounted to staging a protest during an official ceremony. The incident at MIT comes amid heightened tensions across US campuses over the war in Gaza. Students are increasingly scrutinizing institutional ties with Israel and demanding that universities divest from companies and scrap programs linked to the Israeli military. Under the Trump administration, Megha is not the only student to be penalized for her political views. New York University withheld student Logan Rosos's diploma after he addressed the war during his commencement speech.
The genocide currently occurring is supported politically and militarily by the United States, is paid for by our tax dollars, and has been live streamed to our phones for the past 18 months. And that I do not wish to speak only to my own politics today, but to speak for all people of conscience.
Bureau Report, India Today. So we've shown you what exactly happened at MIT. Mind you that Megha Vemuri was part of the commencement ceremony, wasn't part of the graduation ceremony because of a decision taken by the university. What about the federal government in America? I want to bring in Rohit Sharma, who's joining us live from Washington, D.C., on the kind of reactions we've seen. Rohit, good morning, first of all, on what happened at MIT. How has the Trump government really reacted to that? They've cracked down, of course, in an unprecedented way on the likes of Harvard. Is that now coming for MIT too?
Well, it possibly could. I mean, I think all universities have faced some kind of, I would say intimidation by the existing administration in terms of when it comes to protest and when it relates to anti-Semitism. We've seen what's going on with Harvard. But I think also after that video, when the Indian American girl Megha spoke, somebody, and I'm forgetting, I think it was the president from MIT, that she basically came on and said, this is not what this is supposed to be, the speech and all that. So she was trying to do a cover up after Megha spoke, trying to make sure that if this gets watched by anybody, that's not the official position of MIT, and they did not allow her to go on this, on her own speech, off track from what she had submitted. So maybe, we do not know, Akshita, but the fact is, what we saw last summer and spring, the kind of protests that we saw at the universities, even the Biden administration was not happy with that. There are some people that believe that cost President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris that election. So all in all, I think, because Megha is an American citizen, I don't think they could go after her. But clearly, I think the university is trying to do their best to sort of do the damage control right now.
There are two aspects to this debate or this conversation, which is one, that many believe that the Trump government has used this as a way to kind of gag universities, to gag free speech by cracking down on the likes of Megha and so many other students as well, particularly in Harvard. The other aspect to this, Rohit, is also perhaps all of the Israeli students there, the Jewish students, who have repeatedly said they feel unsafe in these campuses now. So how do you kind of reach middle ground amid that from the Trump government?
I 100% agree with that. There were so many people. We also saw videos of students walking out when she started speaking at the commencement. So yes, there has to be some kind of balance, and I think that has to honestly come from the universities and their policies and what they want to have on their campuses, and what constitutes as free speech under First Amendment. And I think, to be frankly honest with you, Akshita, a lot of Indian Americans were up in arms, and they're saying that why didn't she use this opportunity to talk about Pahalgam attacks? As an Indian, you would rather do that. But then she chose to speak about something that I think she wanted to, again, off track. And I think the universities do have to have some kind of protocol as to what they can do or not. And then it is a wider conversation about what free speech means today in this world.
Very true. And it's a debate, of course, that continues, that's ongoing. And we'll see how really the administration, the Trump government, chooses to react to these wave of protests on one hand, by students, by student groups in universities, and on the other instance, like what we've seen in Colorado's Boulder. Thanks very much, Rohit, for joining us. Rohit reporting from Washington, D.C. there. This is, of course, something that we've not just been seeing in America, but in different parts of the world as well. As a result of the Israel-Gaza conflict, growing anger, hate against an entire community, leading to anti-Semitic attacks also taking place, like the one we've seen in Colorado. And let's hope that governments and society at large comes together to kind of stop this targeting of one particular community based on one administration or one government's move. We will continue tracking all the latest reactions that come in, particularly from the Trump government, on this wave of anti-Semitism in America. But that's all we have time for in this edition of NewsTrack. Thanks very much for tuning in.